because this is where the youth should actually go in. They don't want to go farming, but let them carry the fish to DRC. And the rest of that, because that is, if they think that is a more dignified business arrangement. So those are the bits, and I'm glad at least there are areas which can now tell us that we are all moving in the same direction. It is only to speed up, because the agreement is already signed. If we delay for too long, the others are not sleeping. They are going to expand the production and arrive there ahead of us. Thank you, Director.
Okay, thank you very much, Daktari. I will ask now for closing remarks from Oliver and David, and then we can wrap up this session and move on to the next one on regulatory regime.
Thank you very much for the opportunity that you have given us. I do believe that there is a lot that we can learn from each other. And I know that the consultant did not exhaust what she has for us. I therefore think that the organizers will get the outcome of that research and sieve it and share what is necessary to the private sector so that they can gain from the same. One of the things that we have not done well in the past is that researches are done and other documentations have been done, but once it is given out, it lies somewhere and it is not being used by the intended group. So I just hope that the private sector, as you listen to us, you should be able to reach out and get the research paper that has been done. You also reach out to us so that you may get to know the gritty-nitties on how to penetrate the market within Africa continent, because there are still boundaries in spite of the fact that we are starting to trade. There are still national laws and policies that we still need to negotiate on so that we trade with a particular country freely. Therefore, engage us where necessary. One of the things I can say as I finish is that I'm so impressed with the CAM. Most of the negotiations I've been involved in, they have been very informative. They have been always informing us. Here, things are not working well. This country is doing this thing against us. Can you take it up? Ours is to negotiate, and ours is to make sure that there is market access for your products. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I am glad that the presentation that we've seen here has mentioned some of the areas that we have, we can take advantage of in the continental market, and that those areas are also being mentioned in our ACFTA, National Implementation Strategy. And I think once we implement that, because it is one thing to negotiate a free trade area, but the other thing is to implement it. And so the moment we move into implementation, that's where we will get the dividend. One of the questions that we have been asked frequently is why haven't we seen any consignment from Kenya under the ACFTA? And I think this is a challenge that we want to leave with Kenya Association of Manufacturers to think about it. As government, we have negotiated the ACFTA and the market is available. I know currently we are under the process of procuring the trading tools, the rules of origin, certificate of origin, the origin declaration, and the suppliers and producers declaration forms are being procured by the customs, and we are making sure that we have all the documentation ready for the Kenyan private sector to be able to take advantage of in the continental free trade area. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Before I let you go, there was a gentleman there who had a question, and then I'll come to Samuel Matonda here to wrap up this session for us. But there's a gentleman here who had a question. There's a microphone there. If you could please say who you're directing the question to, and keep it very brief.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, my question is just general one, and anyone maybe I can share or it can be answered. Okay, we have just talked of we have enough subsidies that the government has given to the manufacturers. We do appreciate for that, but we find that more or less in production sector, the subsidies that we do get, they are more or less taken over by, we have the Kenya Power, we have other people who use the fuel product. The cost is so high. Even when you try to distribute it, definitely you can't be able even to beat your cost. So I think this is the better forum for CAM to go and do the advocate for us as a smaller traders or smaller manufacturers for that matter, at least for that, or for those particular costs of maybe fuel levies and all those costs related, they are being taken off, at least for small manufacturers to get something. We have dealt more on agriculture, but for more on the manufacturers or the import of cosmetics and like, they are not taken care of.
Okay, thank you very much. David, do you want to, or Oliver, do you want to respond to that briefly?
I think I mentioned, maybe you didn't get me right, I mentioned something called pain areas. And the pain areas is what is actually bringing up the pain areas to manufacturers and to the private sector. And based on the round table meeting between the private sector and the president, those issues are being addressed. And I'm sure with the time the country will be able to enjoy the discussions that are going on. They are being looked at and they are being addressed. Thank you.
Asante sana. I'll now invite Samuel Matonda, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to wrap up the session.
Thank you. Madam Dr. Chemengich, Director Konje, and my colleague George, colleagues, entrepreneurs, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to just really appreciate what Daktari you've brought on board, because it's factual, and I think it is something that we need to really consume and utilize the research that you've come up with. And it's very important that it is timely, it has come when we most need it. Last week I was in Ghana. We visited the FCFTA secretariat to understand how does the private sector come in the implementation of this FCFTA. Much has not been understood, and it's good that we are now disseminating and sensitizing the private sector so that we know that there is a big opportunity. In Ghana alone, they informed us that they spent about 80 billion on importing food items only, and that's not from Africa. Now, when you look at the continent, most of the northern part is dry. The western part also, most of them are not actually into agriculture. They are more into minerals and mining. And when you come to the Horn of Africa, most of it is also dry. What does that mean? why we are talking more of agriculture is because most of the agricultural, the African economies are agricultural based. But then are we taking advantage of that as a country? Are we able to grow more and ensure that we employ more? But of course, the private sector will come in to add value. Even packaging itself and preserving the food is value addition. And that's where we need to come in, and we really have taken a step further. I will say that at the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, we've been reaching out to the chambers in Africa. We've already done joint business councils with most of the chambers. And we have already initiated discussions. Like when the president visited South Africa, there was a discussion on addressing the non-tariff barriers. Our chamber president was there, and I think declaration has been made, and the two heads of the states have agreed on fast-tracking, harmonizing what is supposed to be harmonized so that we do trade. But then, unfortunately, I've worked for KM, I've worked for the Minister of Trade, and now I'm in chamber. Unfortunately, Kenya, we are not ready to take advantage of the immense opportunities in the FCFTA. That is the pain. There is an opportunity, yes, but we are doing micro. We are not looking at commercializing and doing mega production. That is why countries like Egypt are already here and having missions every month to come and get buyers of their goods. And they pass through us, and they pass through all other agencies. And you see, because it's an open market, we can't tell them no. That is why, even as early as next week, Tunisia will also be here. That is why Ghana want to come here. South Africa is coming here, big time. Are we ready to compete because the market is open? There is an opportunity because most times we say we cannot expand because there is no market. I know most of our members have already started going regional and Africa, but then there is room for expansion. And through KM, because I know most of your members are members, and we collaborate in policy and advocacy, I'm encouraging the manufacturers, kindly get out and expand, look at the opportunities, let's utilize, let's brainstorm, and let's take advantage of what has been laid before us. MSMEs are 90%. They control that. That is true. It's a fact. And I hear you, my brother. So government, by the way, we are losing out. Very painful indeed. If you count the number of factories that have been closing in Kenya and going next door, we were discussing that yesterday with a colleague. We have so many factories closing that should worry government, that should worry all of us. And they are going next door because they can still operate from the next door and still supply the market anyway because it's open. So must they operate from Kenya? Yes, we want them to operate from Kenya. What needs to be done? And that's why I like what Dr. has said, and we should have more engagement of this, maybe as a round table again, so that we now really critique and say, we've seen this, how do we move forward and implement? Let me stop there because I was given 3 minutes. But then I think this is very important. We are ready to work as a private sector and move this agenda forward and take advantage of the opportunities. They are there. They are there for all of us, and Kenya is a hub, and we'll share more as we engage further. Thank you very much, MC.
Thank you very much, and I think you've wrapped it up very, very well. So let's give our presenter, Dr. Chemengich, a round of applause. Let's give Oliver Konja a round of applause. And of course, David Dinda as well. Thank you very much. You're free to leave the stage. As we prepare for our next session, I think one of the most important things that has to be discussed now with everything that has been said is a regulatory framework and regime in Kenya. Because if we do not look at that, that is the framework which then creates opportunity for manufacturers and manufacturing to thrive in the country. So for us to be able to have that conversation, I would like to invite the following gentlemen: Joseph Maina, who's the Assistant Director in the State Department of EAC, and Mark Ogot from the State Department of EAC as well. If you could please take your seats on the stage. And we are going to begin with an address by Joseph Minor on behalf of the PS State Department of EAC, which will be delivered by Joseph Minor. Asante sana. You can walk to the podium and you can give your brief remarks on behalf of the PS. And Bwana Mark Ogot, you can take a seat on the podium.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joseph Minor from the State Department for East Africa Community. I'm here to present a few thoughts from the PS, Dr. Kevin Desai, CBS, the Principal Secretary, State Department for East Africa Community. He says that he's he appreciates this important occasion of the 4th Kenya Manufacturing Summit and Expo that's being held today at Kasarani Stadium. He appreciates the Kenya Association of Manufacturers for organizing this summit and Expo, since it aims at showcasing the great potential that local manufacturing has in driving an export-led economy. As you are aware, manufacturing is one of the key pillars under the Big Four agenda of the government of Kenya. The sector currently contributes about 10% of Kenya's gross domestic product and helps to alleviate the unemployment problem in Kenya by creating thousands of quality jobs. The government intends to raise the contribution of the manufacturing sector to 15% of the GDP by focusing on the following key areas: agro-processing, fish processing, leather, textiles, apparel, iron and steel, oil, minerals and gas, and construction materials. At the State Department for East African Community, we continue to champion policy and regulatory reforms that are aimed at making Kenya a leading manufacturing hub in the African continent. In the annual Ease of Doing Business rankings by the World Bank, Kenya has improved 80 positions from position 136 in 2014 to position 56 globally in 2019, and in which Kenya was ranked as the 3rd most reformed economy in Africa. This index assesses how easy or difficult it is for an entrepreneur to open and run a business in the country by examining critical areas in the life cycle of a business, namely starting a business, dealing with construction permits, getting electricity, registering property, accessing credit, protecting minority investors, paying taxes, trading across borders, enforcing contracts, resolving insolvency, and labor market regulation. In these factors, what we normally do is to address the procedures, the time and the cost involved in accessing these different dimensions. So there has been a continuous decline in the cost of doing these issues as witnessed by the World Bank. Although the World Bank has this year discontinued the Ease of Doing Business rankings, the government remains committed to pursuing the business reforms agenda, as it will lead to greater economic competitiveness for Kenya. Today, majority of Kenya's agricultural products are still exported in raw form, with minimal value addition being undertaken. I therefore urge players in the manufacturing sector to invest in agro-processing so that our agricultural produce may fetch more value in the international market. This is one way in which the private sector can partner with us in reforming our economy. Kenya is an active member of the East Africa Community, EAC, COMESA, and the African Continental Free Trade Area, which together constitute a market of 1.2 billion people. These economic trading blocs are important in that Kenya Kenyan goods and services are granted preferential market access in the member states. It is therefore important for Kenyan manufacturers to expand their manufacturing capacity to tap and service opportunities in these trading blocks. In order to grow the manufacturing sector, there is need for increased purchase of locally produced goods and services by both the public and private sectors. The Buy Kenya, Build Kenya strategy is a policy of the Kenyan government that is aimed at inculcating in the mind of all Kenyan citizens patriotism and a preference for Kenyan goods and services as a means of supporting growth of the domestic economy. Implementing the new policy will lead to job creation and consequently better wages for the employees and support Kenya's quest to have a robust, diversified, and competitive manufacturing sector. As the government, we have embarked on cascading business reforms from the national level to the county level so as to increase efficiencies in public service delivery at the counties. In this regard, our focus remains on simplifying public service processes and procedures and reducing service delivery time as well as the cost of accessing government services. We are also addressing corruption issues affecting businesses by initiating reforms in key areas where the country has been ranked poorly in the past annual Corruption Perception Index surveys. These surveys rank countries according to how they are perceived by business executives. We acknowledge that corruption is a vice that enjoins the public and private sector. It takes two to tango. We therefore call upon the private sector to join us in the noble journey of transforming our ways of doing business. Do not offer bribes. Kenya is also focused on improved ranking under the Global Competitiveness Index by entrenching business reforms and identifying new areas where reforms are required. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to reiterate that the government of Kenya remains committed to improving the business environment in the country for both local and international investors. In closing, I wish you all a successful summit and expo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please have a seat on the up there. Okay, so those are the remarks of the PS as read to you by Mr. Joseph Maina, who's the Assistant Director, State Department of EAC, and we have Mark Ogot here also from the State Department of EAC. Listening to the remarks that have been made there, I have a few questions for you. And of course, for those who are here, Kwame Owino, I see you. Karibu. For those of you who are here, we are now discussing regulatory framework. And I think one of the things that the previous speakers before you mentioned is around issues of taxation. There's the issues of high cost of productivity. I think my brother at the corner there had talked about that, and is lamenting around issues of the high cost of productivity. I think Dr. Cherumen talked to us about how it is we are still at a very low level in terms of what we are producing. We are looking at foodstuffs, textiles, so on and so forth. We should be moving to medium and high technology parameters for us then to be able to be more competitive. How is the regulatory framework as is incentivizing manufacturers to be able to at least improve efficiencies, up their productivity, and even engage in the CFTA? I think Joseph Maina, I'll let you go first.
Okay, thank you very much for those questions. As the PS has identified in his speech, he says that there are a number of issues that the government is undertaking to try and improve the business climate in Kenya. For example, in starting a business, there are a number of procedures that have been eliminated from the process. And the government has also waived some charges so that those people who want to start a business, they can have an easier time. As most of you will know, is that previously, starting a business in Kenya was a very difficult task for the investors. But the process has continued to improve, and we still remain committed to taking those reforms so that we can address any other issues that the investors may be having. Other issues that we are also working very much upon, and which have contributed to the high cost of doing business, is the cost of electricity. Kenya, among its peers in the world, I think has one of the highest cost of electricity. So the government is working hard to try and lower the charges through a number of interventions. For example, increasing the electricity capacity. It has also been looking at some of the issues in marketing of power. It has been transforming Kenya Power to become more competitive, such that once it attains the efficiency, it can be able to pass on the benefits to consumers in terms of lower prices. There are also other issues like trading across borders, where the government has done a lot of work in trying to reduce the documentary compliance that investors need either to import or to export from Kenya. So all these things are aimed at making Kenya a more competitive global player in the manufacturing and in the business environment. So there is a lot the government is doing, and in the course of time, as it has been said, is that we are laying the foundation so that we can become a more competitive player in the international business climate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To the next gentleman, the question that then I would like to ask you is this. During the onset of COVID, I think one of the things that manufacturers felt hit the most is in the importation of raw materials. And with all the challenges that come with that, of course, with COVID-19 and the pandemic still going on, the shortage of raw materials, how then can the regulatory framework support manufacturers here to look within, so that then we are beginning to look at how we can do our own manufacturing using our own raw materials here and guard against the shocks that come from the shortages in importing raw materials from outside Kenya?
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. Now, regulations are mainly, some of them are non-tax. These are what we call non-tariff measures. There are regulations that are specific to certain industries. And the reason why we have regulation is to balance between the public and the private interest. The private interest, the interest is to make profit and produce. But the public have other interests, which are non-monetary. So if you're a manufacturer, for example, you need to be regulated so that whatever you're producing is not harmful to the public, or your byproducts of that industry is not harmful to the public. But yes, we look at these regulations. Some of them have been there for many, many years. Some of them are borrowed from international practices. Some of them are regional. So you find that we have regulations that, if you look at the objectives, probably because of the economy's change with the time, their objectives are no longer valid as per now. So I'll give you an example. For example, you've got a regulation that was maybe done in the 60s or 70s. If you review that regulation today, maybe it's not irrelevant. So when COVID came, it found us with some regulations that were there for many years, and we never had the opportunity to review them. Now, after COVID last year, what we're doing now, we adopted a toolkit together with UNCTAD. This toolkit will now be reviewing those regulations because they are specific to sectors and they are specific to industries. So we'll be reviewing them. What is the design of that regulation? Why was it designed? Is it still relevant? Can we improve the design? Now, if the design was good, how is it implemented? Because the way they're implemented also add costs to the production system of any industry. So we want to really review those non-tariff measures, review the design, and make sure that they are more relevant today. Now, when the COVID came, there was a lot of panic in the world because people did not know why these things occurred. People never used to travel. And now, the fact that you know now that travel, accommodation, and food industry actually controls the world economies. If you cannot travel, you cannot go and spend somewhere, and you cannot eat outside, the world will come to a standstill. And because people could not travel, and the idea of working home was not common with people, most industries were grounded. If you look at the history of industrial development, when the container was invented, some maybe 100 years ago, it really improved manufacturing because of the way we could now supply goods. Now, when the containers could not move, because people could not move, it really affected the world economies, including Kenya and East Africa. So these are the lessons that we are learning, that yes, we have got these regulations. They are good for the public and for the private sector, but we need to review them now so that they are not affecting trade, they're not affecting manufacturing, and they're not impacting negatively on the productive system of Kenya and the East Africa and the world.
Okay, thank you for that. Joseph Minor, hearing what Mark Ogot has said, and we have manufacturers here in this forum, and just thinking about how we heard from the presentation from Dr. Chemengich that we trade at about 62% with global markets and about 18% intra-Africa trade. So there's a very high potential for local manufacturers to be able, to take advantage of the CFTA and service the other missing percentage in terms of the manufacturing deficit across Africa. How would you say the regulatory frameworks we have in Kenya are providing an opportunity for manufacturers to position themselves to then be able to take advantage of the opportunities in the CFTA?
Okay, thank you very much. It's very true that we do more business with the rest of the world than we do with Africa. Actually, even it's below than 18%. It should be around 12% intra-Africa trade. That is actually the lowest in the world. If you look at a country like a continent like Europe, they do much more, up to 50% and above. So this amount of business we give to outsiders, if I can use that term, is actually too much. And one of the issues that the government is doing with the rest of the African countries was actually to bring the African continental free trade area, such that countries that operate in Africa, that are in Africa, they are treated just like the way we treat our local consumers. So we reduce tariffs, for example, we reduce non-tariff barriers, and so forth. So this regulatory environment is supposed to make intra-Africa trade to grow more than it is at the moment. One thing also is that we should also learn to consume our own local products, because that's one thing that we have seen most of our citizens are averse to doing. So if you can consume our own local products, then we are more likely to consume products from Uganda, from Tanzania, and other African countries. So we need really to start thinking about how to grow our own local economies. The government has introduced a strategy known as Buy Kenya, Build Kenya. This is supposed to attract the local consumers to purchase and consume their own goods and services. Because unless we do that, then we are going to spend a lot of money buying goods from outside, which means actually we are using our scarce foreign exchange. So all these are supposed to make consumption of local products and also products from other African countries more and more appealing to the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Marco Gott, one of the pain points for manufacturers here, especially those who would want to enhance their trading either in the EAC under COMESA or want to take advantage of the CFTA and trade across the region, are the rules of origin. How can these be looked into to create a more enabling environment for that trade to happen? So we can even take that intra-Africa trade up from 12% to even 20%.
Oh, thank you. Now, rules of origin are there to govern trade. So that, for example, in the EAC where we've got a free market, you don't want somebody to go and import something from China or from Pakistan and then sell it to the neighboring country, vice versa. Rules of origin are supposed to protect the local factories, the local manufacturers. It's supposed to encourage sourcing of material from within East Africa. For example, our rule says that you need to add value. If you're importing a material, you need to add value to a certain percentage for you to qualify to trade within the EAC. So every trade regime has got their own rules of origin. For example, EAC we have got one, SADC has got theirs, so is COMESA, and so is the CFTA. The way rules are designed, for example, in Kenya and East Africa, when it is made, we usually involve the private sector, because this is the private sector that is going to implement the same, and the people who are going to trade. So the rules are meant to spark growth, they're meant to add value to our goods, and they're meant to expand the regional investment. One of the targets is so that when you have a favorable rules origin regime, then we're going to attract more investment in the country. Of course, there are challenges. The challenges comes when you start making rules for certain goods. For example, textile and vehicles, and then the low value goods. Unfortunately, we tend to trade in the same range of goods. But I think the challenges we have is when we have the private sector who are not talking to each other. For example, the government is the one who negotiate rules of origin, but sometimes you feel that the private sector should also engage their counterparts in other countries or regions so that they have a common ground. Sometimes what they want is not what the other person wants, but it's still because they don't talk to each other, they don't know their own interest, and in fact, for example, today, if you look at the market of textile in East Africa, just go anywhere in Nairobi, every shop is filled with materials from outside. Imagine if you were to manufacture a quarter of that textile in Kenya, a quarter of it only. It would reduce poverty by, let's say, 10%. But because of we don't have a favorable rules of origin in the region, we tend to import more from outside than what we manufacture inside. But again, the rules of origin alone will not help. I will also talk about, I'll talk to industries again and again, and the government. We need to up our game, do more research on textile or any other product that we produce, so that we up the game so that we produce more competitive products than we are producing today. Because if somebody wants a good suit or a good dress, they'll go for the good dress. They'll not go for your dress because it's Kenyan or because it is East African. So industries should also take advantage of that and try to up their game so that we produce low quality goods. But I think right now we find that the root origin is meant to make sure that our local materials is used to produce what we are producing locally. So to me, they're not a hindrance to our expansion. What is the hindrance is what produce and how do the research to produce more value-added goods. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Joseph, the e-commerce has a potential to reduce business costs, enhance business visibility, and facilitate access to wider markets. How is this possible to do in the market that we're in now, and especially looking at partnering with private sector to strengthen infrastructure development across places, things like internet, to ensure then that we've got a very strong e-commerce environment where then manufacturers can be a bit more competitive?
Okay, thank you. E-commerce is one of the fields that Kenya is excelling in. Actually, Kenya is one of the leaders in Africa in e-commerce. And this has been made possible through the investments that the government has done, especially in mobile telephony and also internet. So we can say that the basic structure for e-commerce has already been laid. Actually, what companies now need to do more is to use the e-commerce platform to make it to make their businesses grow more and more. And we have some challenges actually even right now with e-commerce, because there are those people who especially use fraud in this e-commerce. So the government is in the process of creating laws and regulations that will make sure that e-commerce in Kenya is done effectively. So this is an area that is growing, and that even the ordinary citizens have really come to appreciate it. And it's just a matter of reducing those areas, especially where fraud can happen, so that e-commerce can be regulated more effectively. So thank you.
At this point, I'd also like to invite to the stage Ms. Helen Cherumen from the Kenya Investment Authority and Michael Ogutu from the Kenya Investment Authority. Please, if you could join us here on stage. Thank you very much. Before I go to Helen and to Michael, I'd like Joseph very quickly to talk about the issue of excise. So you find that one of the things that is a factor in competitiveness of goods is even packaging. And you'll find somebody maybe is manufacturing paint and has to package it in plastic, but then has to pay a 10%. Whereas if I was importing that from outside, I may not have to pay that. So how is the regulatory framework looking into those sorts of challenges?
Okay, excise duties are one of the main ways the government gets revenue for economic development. So it's actually a requirement by the law that manufacturers have to pay 10% of the revenue as excise duties. So the government has been looking at some of these issues with with the aim of reducing excise duties. And we have been engaging the manufacturers, and we've been holding discussions about how best we can go about reducing these excise duties. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, perhaps we go now to Helen Cherumen, talk a bit about the Kenya Investment Authority, and maybe you could tell us what are some of the initiatives by the Kenya Investment Authority to improve the manufacturing landscape for manufacturers in Kenya.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'll talk about how Kenya Investment Authority promotes investment in Kenya. Kenya Investment Authority is a government body charged with the responsibility of promoting private investment. And in promoting private investment, we actually do the actual promotion. That is, we organize various international and local investment forums where investors are disseminated with information pertaining investment environment in the country. We also facilitate investors because we realize that investors who are already in the country are very good ambassadors to actually inform other investors about what is happening in the country and the investment environment in the country. In promoting private investment, we also organize delegations where investors from outside the country come, and we organize forums whereby we exchange ideas. Investors get to meet, local investors get to meet these international investors, and they agree. Some of them even go into joint ventures. And when we arrange for business-to-business meetings, the local investors get to know and they value what we have been actually disseminating, that they need to manufacture or produce products which are internationally accepted. We also work with counties because we realize all investors in the country will actually locate in one county or the other. So in working with the counties, we realize that there will be a seamless processes whereby as we promote investment, county government will also we will speak the same language with what we are always informing our investors. We realize that we also work with private sector, like today we work a lot with private sector, KEPSA, to make sure that all investors because all private investors are in the private sector. So because we are government, we always work with them so that whatever we get from investors, we make sure that if there is a policy issue, we escalate the issues and that investors face our challenges which are faced by investors. In organizing also these international forums and local forums, we realized that Can Invest came up with an initiative, the government through Can Invest came up with an initiative of coming up with investment handbook, whereby the same handbook is used to disseminate information, and at the same time it builds capacity to county government officials, whereby when we are facilitating investors, all the information which can be received from the headquarters can also be received from the county government.
Okay, thank you very much, Helen. Michael Ogutu, what are the 3 pain points that investors have experienced and which Ken Invest has been able to use as an advocacy area to make investment a bit more friendly?
Thank you very much for your question. Most of investors who visit the country, you find that when it comes to setting up, an issue of land has been a problem, and also not understanding taxation in Kenya So you find that most of them, when they invest, first finding a place becomes a problem. Maybe those people who want to do factory for manufacturing purpose, and then sometimes getting a warehouse is also a problem to them because they do not understand maybe places where they can get this. And also sometimes before they get work permit, they don't know how to go through the processes. So can invest through the government agencies set up a one-stop center at the Kenya Investment Authority, where if you are an investor, you are a foreign investor, for example, you can come in, walk in. There is business registration services at the authority where your business will be registered, and also there is KRA to facilitate you with the PIN and also advice on tax matters. And then we also have immigration. All investors passing through can invest. We don't have issue getting a work permit because even one of our staff sits at the immigration round table where the work permits are approved. Concerning getting a land, currently I'm very happy also to see Dr. Kimeo is here. The government has incentives, schemes like EPZA and CESA, where with the government in CESA, you can just go in, set up, and enjoy all the incentives that the government offer. We also have EPZ, export processing zones, for those who would like just to do exports. The export processing zone also have facilities that can encourage setting up of investment, especially manufacturing for export. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'd just like to ask Helen to chime in there around especially the issues of the special economic zones. Do we feel that enough is being done to at least have them in each county if possible? And what would that look like in terms of Kenya Invest even doing some advocacy around that, so that then you have investors who are taking advantage of those incentives?
Okay, thank you for the question. I believe Economic Zone Authority will actually elaborate on the same. But in sensitizing investors on the incentives offered by the zones, we are doing that.
All right, thank you. We have to wrap up this session, but before we do, I'd like to come back to the floor. If there are any questions for our panelists before I ask them to make their closing remarks. Or we don't have manufacturers here. Okay. There's a question. Yes, there's a question there. If you could please pass him a microphone, tafadhali. No, let's just pass you a microphone so at least. I think there was one that was going, but anyway, I can give you mine. It's fine.
Okay, thank you very much. My question is very simple. The madam said that they do give the investor, the facilitator. Which kind of a facilitation?
Thank you for the question. Kenya Investment Authority facilitates investors through the one-stop center. And in this particular one-stop center, we have representatives from various government regulators and agencies. So in facilitating investors, all the investors who want to invest in this country and they want to register companies, they come through Can Invest, and there is an officer from Business Registration Bureau. That particular officer will facilitate in registering the company, and if they want to register, they want a PIN, we actually facilitate through the Kenya Revenue Authority because they are represented also under the one-stop shop. And if they want to install maybe power, we have an officer from Kenya Power who will always facilitate that particular investor. So for various licenses and permits, we always facilitate through the one-stop shop. We also offer advisory services just in case investors come and they are interested in investing under the special economic zones or export processing zones. We facilitate those investors through the various agencies which are actually represented in the zone.
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. Do we have another? All right. Yes. Please state your name and ask your question.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Rajan Shah, the Vice Chair of CAM. I've been listening to the panel. I just have a question, Madam, to yourself. From Kenya Investment Authority point of view, if there is any foreign investor who comes here and wants advice that, look, I am interested in this sector, let's say pharmaceuticals, or I'm in the agro-processing, how much information do you have in the authority to kind of give more of that advisory service to give an understanding of the landscape of that particular sector? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. In Gen Invest, officers are divided into sectors. So, so those various officers will always be ready to provide information. We have sector profiles, and we work a lot with CAM. All the information that we have, we compare with what Kenya Association Manufacturers also have. So that is how we facilitate investors.
Okay, thank you for that. We have to bring this topic to a close, so I'm going to ask each of the panelists to just give their closing remarks, starting with you, Madam Helen.
Okay, thank you. My closing remark is to thank Kenya Association of Manufacturers for actually coming up with such a forum where investors interact with government agencies and provide information, and also contact, so that in case there are any other investors who want to contact us, we are always reachable, and we can provide all the facilitation that is required, and our services are free of charge, so all investors who come for facilitation we will offer. We also work a lot with counties in facilitating investors, because we realize that all investors who come through Can Invest will invest in one county or the other. So we are requesting all investors to make use of our one-stop center.
Okay, thank you very much. And Joseph Minor?
Okay, I also want to thank Kenya Association of Manufacturers for organizing this forum, because it's through such forums where their issues can be listened to and they can also be handled. At the East African community, we champion reforms that are aimed at making Kenya a more competitive manufacturing hub in Africa. So we address the issues that manufacturers have, like power, starting a business, trading across borders, all those factors that manufacturers have at their core. We normally address them through coordinating with other government agencies like KRA. We deal with NHIF, NSSF, and all the relevant government agencies. So we come across and then we brainstorm on those issues and how we can improve the business climate in Kenya. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's Joseph Minor. Asante sana. Marco Got?
I think somebody had said that we are not very good in marketing Kenya and East Africa. There's some truth in it. A long time ago, if we went to any agricultural show, like Nairobi, you will realize that there's so many things that we do that we don't know. So I would like the government and the private sector to be together so that we can market Kenya more than we are doing today. For example, Rivertex. I just learned the other day that they got a shop somewhere in Moy Avenue where they are selling their products. Then I was saying, like, we don't know about it because we are not marketing. We can do more than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco Got. And finally, Michael Ogutu.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank CAM for the opportunity and also giving us a chance so that we can market Kenya. What I would like to say is that unlike before, just from what the presenters had said, setting a business in Kenya, even manufacturing, is much, much easier than before. Currently, there are a number of government agencies that do the promotion, and the main one being Can Invest. And also, if you are doing manufacturing, Kenya has a Foreign Investment Protection Act. So to all manufacturers, your investment is guaranteed. There is no day the government will come to pick your investment. And also to everyone, even the locals, that is the domestic direct investments, we welcome you at Kenya Investment because we also offer support to SMEs. And thank you very much for this time.
Okay, thank you very much. Please give a round of applause to our presenters. That's been Ms. Helen Cherumen from the Kenya Investment Authority, Michael Ogutu from the Kenya Investment Authority, Joseph Minor, Assistant Director, State Department of EAC, and Mark Ogot, also from the State Department of EAC. You can now take your seats as we go into the next conversation, which is a very interesting one, because what does the environment now as is portend for manufacturing? We are still battling with the COVID-19 pandemic. We are still thinking about what it's going to look like going into 2022 with a general election coming up. And of course, looking at how the economy has been performing over this period, what are the things that can be done to make the manufacturing environment a bit better for manufacturers? So for us to have this conversation, I'd like to invite the following panelists. Dr. Mesha Kimeu, who's the CEO of the Special Economic Zone Authority. I think we've just talked a bit about that. So if you could please come to the stage. Kwame Owino, CEO of the Institute of Economic Affairs. Please join me on the stage. And Mr. Steve Odua, who's the Director, Private Sector and Business Environment Development. So I think I'll start with you, Kwame. So before COVID-19 hit, the top 3 priorities for majority of businesses were to increase profitability, increase revenue, and increase domestic market share. And once COVID-19 hit, that focus shifted to reducing costs, retaining jobs, and improving cash flows. Is that still the situation now, with curfew being lifted and a bit of ease on the restrictions that the COVID-19 measures brought?
All right. Okay, first, I think, I mean, my opinion is based on the fact that I don't run a manufacturing firm, but I think that conditions after the lifting of the restrictions was a moment for firms to consolidate. So obviously, it's not as if the recovery has started. I think has started, but it's basically the foundation has been laid. So obviously, that's one. But all this is dependent on the extent to which people will feel sufficiently safe to come back to work full-time and everything to be restored. So that too is dependent on obviously the rollout of vaccinations. Obviously, if people feel safer, and obviously people know that they can work cheek and jowl as sometimes they do in manufacturing enterprises, and there's no risk for workers to be unwell and for people to be unwell on the other side. That's it. So I think for a firm right now, it's just to make sure that, okay, are my workers sufficiently ready? is the equipment and stuff that I need available? And obviously for those who get in intermediate inputs, there's this global supply chain problem. And everybody hopes that it clears. I mean, it's not going to be easy. So I think, so for instance, I was just reading something before I came today, which says that 1 year ago, if you are talking about semiconductor chips, right, you needed to wait for 6 weeks before they're delivered. Right now, it's actually almost 26, which means it's by a lead time of 4 times as much. So all those other things are, some of them are logistically, about the logistics, some of them are about just keeping the business prepared, but the others are about whether economic activity and social activity, which is what farms provide for, is available. So some are in the control of the farm managers, the others depend on how other conditions work globally.
Is it time for then manufacturers to begin looking internally and saying, if there's going to be a freeze in the global supply chain, what are some of the things that they can do to look inwards and say, even in terms of raw materials, what can we begin to exploit and take advantage of in the country?
I think they're already doing that. Business people don't wait for, they always have one or the other options. So if you're getting, say, textiles or something from, say, China, India, and you remember there was a freeze last year, already many businesses actually made adjustments and all that. But I think that notwithstanding, there's some things for which there's just certain places where they come from. So some intermediate inputs are just concentrated in China, Turkey, or India, for instance, and that's it. So let's start with, for instance, if somebody is packaging coffee and tea off Germany or off the UK, they still will need coffee and tea to be able to pack. So some things can be replaced, have substitutes, others don't have. And I think that's part of the reason why making sure that people are able to work and go back to work sooner than later is essential.
I think we might have lost power. Oh, it's back, okay.
Yes, and I think that's why people the most important thing right now is how far, because they killed the engine. Some people killed the engine. So the point is you're revving, but you're just hoping that conditions open up and everything fits well so that the production can start again. You hope that the demand will be there, jobs, because job loss also affects manufacturing demand. Once that recovery takes place, then everybody rolls back. Of course, new industries have also arisen. I think opportunities are always being made available. But to my mind, the biggest thing for manufacturing, there's a huge space and scope for domestic cover. But the thing about manufacturing global value chains is that they tend to be connected because that's the way efficiencies are actually consolidated. So many of them will actually still keep fingers crossed and hope that, look, we don't have these waves going up and down and forcing closures again and about. But the capacity that is required, whether it's shipping, logistics, and all those other places, everybody's responding to them. They're not showing up as much here because the demand is not on this side. I mean, supply is not on this side, but it's showing up because if people are unable to get supplies from other places, then intermediate inputs that might be available for manufacturers here to export in turn also become a problem. So I think everybody is managing, but everybody's supply chains are maybe 6-7 weeks behind line.
And it's probably going to get even worse heading to the election.
Will it? I hope not, to be honest. I just hope not, because if that would be a double whammy in the sense that just as a recovery is taking place and then that happens. But the view for me is that, yes, they are all signs. People think there's trouble in the US, inflation is coming, adjustments are being made. China has also been a little bit slower. But my view is this is an opportunity for countries such as Kenya and all that to actually make the best of that opportunity. Opportunities arise here, and I think business people are good at spotting them, testing them. So this is, if you ask me, most of this is a moment where government has to be very, quote-unquote, conservative and cautious. Don't do rash things in the search for new money or revenues, and then crash the recovery that firms are hoping for.
All right, let's talk about the special economic zones, and this one now we'll go to Dr. Kimeu. Who can tell us a bit about what has been the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic with regard to foreign investment and direct foreign investment through the special economic zones?
Thank you very much for that question. First, I would wish to say that COVID pandemic had a very serious implications on flow of business in this country among Kenyan manufacturers. The country as we are today, we are not sufficient in terms of raw materials required for production of different products. So you'll find many manufacturers import a lot of raw materials. Now when COVID came calling, there were restrictions in movement. Manufacturers of those raw materials were affected. Some closed down. And therefore, the global value chains were greatly affected. In fact, some manufacturers could not get raw materials to produce their goods. Now, that was the challenge of raw materials. But at the same time, even the buyers where those goods are sold, they were also affected. So they also, some of them closed down for some time. So you'll find both sides of the chain were affected. But as a country, we can say we've also learned a lesson. It is very risky to depend on imported raw materials 100% because the global trends are changing and every country needs to look inwardly. What can they do as a country? What can they do as manufacturers to take advantage of available resources to generate as much raw materials from within as possible? The SEZ program aims at providing facilities which manufacturers can use to produce goods and services at fairly reduced costs due to the incentives which are provided under the SEZ Act. When it comes to the issue of the raw materials and what the government needs to do or the local investors needs to do to build capacities to produce more, I wish to just take an example of the textiles and apparel sector. We are the leading country in Africa in terms of exports of apparels to the US market and AGOA. But most of the raw materials are imported. AGOA requires African countries to produce raw materials from within and import small components of the same. So what are we doing as a country through the SEZ program to support this sector? Because we are looking at how can we have a complete value chain in terms of cotton, where we have the farming, the ginning, the textile mills, and eventually the apparels, the end products being manufactured and sold either locally or exported. What the government has done is to prioritize Naivasha Special Economic Zone to be textile and apparel sector priority for the manufacturers. And one of the reasons why we don't have textile mills, many of them located in this country, it is because of the cost of power. Textile mills consume a lot of power, and the cost of power in Kenya is very high, so it is prohibitive to attract investors in that sector. And what government has done is to gazette a special tariff of power for Naivasha at 5 US cents so that we can attract textile mills which are going to manufacture the fabrics and supply to the apparel companies which will be located at Naivasha or supply to the apparel companies which are operating under the EPZ program. So that particular tariff, our engagement with the investors in that sector have indicated it is okay. They can be able to do business and they'll be able to produce the required fabrics and supply to the apparel sector. We are in engagement with such investors, and we are sure we are going to make progress and make sure Kenya becomes self-reliant in terms of production of raw materials for the apparel sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Just one more thing around the SEZ is the expansion program of the SEZ. How is infrastructure playing a role in terms of ensuring that we have those special economic zones in more places than just where they are right now? Because definitely they are providing great opportunities for investors and the incentives are good. So how can we then look at a situation where we have them in more areas than they are now? And what's the progress with that?
Thank you very much. The SEZ Act provides for both public and private SEZs. At the moment, we have 16 gazetted SEZs. They are located in different parts of the country. And out of the 16, only 3 are public, meaning the private sector is playing a key role in developing SEZ infrastructure for attraction of investors. Government cannot develop the infrastructure required by investors because our engagement with investors is such that the investment environment in Kenya is becoming more attractive by the day. So we need more facilities to be developed. At the moment, the government is developing Naivasha Special Economic Zone. It will be developing a Dongokundu Special Economic Zone. The other public SEZ is Konza Technopolis, which is being developed for IT and innovation related. The private sector is playing a leading role in developing infrastructure. And where are we at the moment? I've said we have 16 SEZs already gazetted, of which only 3 are public. So the others are being developed by the private investors, and they are at various stages of development. Some of them are already operational, and they have attracted investors who are already doing business, and many more are advanced stages of development. So we hope in the coming 2-3 years, we will have adequate facilities with ready facilities for investors to use as they get into different manufacturing activities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Steve Odua, we're heading to a very critical period, which is the general election in 2022. For manufacturers, what are the asks that they should be, directing towards whoever is thinking about coming in as the leader of this country and the administration? What sort of asks should they be consolidating and putting forward?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all. Indeed, for election period as we come in, one of the key things I believe the manufacturers should be looking for is, one, the continuity in improving the ease of doing business. I think that is very critical. And this cuts across various aspects, especially issue of multiple regulation. That is a big challenge currently experienced by most manufacturers. The other ask I believe they should also be looking into is how we could reduce the cost of doing business. I think we have a Christmas present coming ahead in terms of reduction of electricity, but then we still can do more, and especially looking at our global competitiveness as a country, given that now we are operating in a global environment. So the issue of reduction in cost of doing business is very critical. I think, again, maintenance of infrastructure development is also a key aspect I believe they should continue looking into. I know a big challenge, and has been alluded by Dr. Kimeo here, is a workspace, good quality workspace for industries to set up and move on. A lot of investors are asking for that. That's some area that probably are lagging behind, but you're happy the private sector is filling that gap by also coming up and setting up that. But that's something they could have that continuity in terms of moving forward. And also ensuring that we have a stable macroeconomic environment to do business. Thank you.
Okay. As we are going towards this electoral period, you know, if we are looking at the environment here and the markets here as a bit restrictive, you've heard from the research that was presented that there's a lot of opportunity in the CFTA. We are also trading a lot with the EAC and the COMESA. What are then there the opportunities for local manufacturers to begin to look outside the borders rather than just trying to fit within an economy that might be shrinking and that has got very oppressive, if I may say, regulatory frameworks?
Yeah, thank you once again. Yeah, indeed, the government has done a lot in terms of trying to open up the borders in terms of engaging with the various, both at bilateral and multilateral level, and in particular, like you've mentioned, the regional African CFTA. And I believe our strength in enhancing regional trade is through manufactured products. Has been traditionally our export engines, the tea, coffee, raw materials. I think it's time that we now engage, and we have a big edge. Just looking at the EAC as an example, Kenya is, the bigger brother in terms of a large, diversified manufacturing sector. But of course, as our neighbors are also coming up in terms of developing their capacities, and as we also expand into those other countries, as it were, we should now look at DRC, which is coming up as a big market that we can exploit. Like has been observed in the previous discussions, we could still, even at the food processing sector, there's a lot of opportunities in Angola, in Mozambique, in Nigeria, like we had, where we could export a lot of those food products. And like you even can see around, we are actually doing quite a lot of processing in the food industries. Thank you.
Okay. Kwame, let me ask. Even if we were to look at liberalization at about 100% and say, okay, who are the people we can trade with in the region? And say, let's trade with South Africa. We are not on the same level in terms of where they are in their technology and productivity, where you could be looking at them doing things like automobiles, and they're looking at base metals and things like those. Well, here we are still at a very, we're operating on a completely different level. How do we then get to a situation where, even if we are looking then to trade that far through the CFTA, our goods are more competitive and they are priced more competitively?
Okay. You see, I think one thing that we economists have a problem explaining to people is that trade is not war. Trade is not war, and the only reason people trade is because you're providing to somebody else a good that they do not have or they cannot produce competitively and buying something else from them. So it's not war. So it doesn't matter that at the technology level, and some manufacturing from the Republic of South Africa, for instance, is very sophisticated, and they manufacture, say, motor vehicles. But those who've been to South Africa, for instance, know that in some products such as yogurt, jams, and some food processes, some kinds of food materials that actually come from here. Even the biscuits that I find there, actually, Kenya has better biscuits. That's what I think. Breakfast cereals, we have better breakfast cereals. So all those are opportunities that are available. So the function of trade is actually to say, it's just like a household. I, for instance, am food dependent. I have a small income. I don't have a farm, but I buy it from whoever sells it to me, because then my value is actually through working for IEA, I get a wage and I'm able to buy food. So I think we need to take away the metaphors of war when we are discussing trade. Business people don't want to cheat. You want to make something, send it to somebody else, they'll find value in it, and they buy it and give you its money's worth. So I think that basic economics tells you that actually the best trade policy is a free trade policy, unilateral liberalization. Because what that does is it puts pressure on us to find the things that we are best at, and then specialization of our labor and our resources, and we use that. So South Africa, for instance, regardless of what happens, is never going to produce as good tea as we have in Kenya. Nigeria is never going to produce as good tea. I think they're trying to develop it, but they don't have a good dairy in Nigeria like what we have. So all those opportunities, leave it to business people to fix, and just stay out of their way, make sure the rules are clear, and obviously there's no discrimination, and the rest just works itself out.
Okay. Let me also ask you, you've heard that, there are all these opportunities that are there. Like, for example, in DRC, Angola, Nigeria, Namibia, they're all importing food. Why are we then having a situation where we are unable to meet that demand?
Part of it is because food production in Kenya is expensive. Some foods from Kenya are very, very expensive. Kenya has some of the most expensive maize on the continent. Why? Because we are using the wrong agroecological zones to produce food. Sugar, some of the most expensive, not just in the continent, the world. So basically what this means is if we left these resources in the hands of private sector people and asked them, find the best use for the land in Western Kenya, for instance. I mean, my parents have a small, what was supposed to be a sugarcane farm. We don't. It's a waste of time. So if you find and you leave it to the people who own those resources to organize those resources in a way that provides value to them and have government just facilitate it, not force people to grow sugarcane because somebody who runs a sugar company thinks it must be, for instance, or Sisal, or whatever that it is, people tend to know. Now, Kenya is good at producing some foods and not others. So for instance, in cereals, rice, maize, a little bit of wheat, Kenya is very is very uncompetitive. Those things require a lot of water. This is a water scarce country. So what that means necessarily is if you're dealing with, say, South Sudan or countries that have massive forms of water like Uganda, then you don't compete very, very well. So Uganda brings in maize all the way from the west of Uganda, from the east of Uganda into Kenya, at 1/3 what the best farmers in Kenya are producing it at. What the economics tells you is maybe we shouldn't be producing maize. I mean, that's hard to say, but maybe we shouldn't. We should be producing something else. So those are the kind of decisions that we need to make. The economics is clear. It's the politics that I think is a problem.
Okay. Dr. Kimeu, the SEZs, MCMEs might say that, because of the incentives that are produced, that are given there, that they create an unfair advantage for other manufacturers who are not benefiting from the SEZs or who are not in the SEZ program. What would you say to that? Because China is a big issue.
Let me say this. Sometimes we talk of incentives and we fail to analyze how much competitive advantage do they give to these investors operating in the special economic zones against those who are manufacturing under the domestic regime. I'm saying this because I'll give you an example. We've had companies operating under economic zones, producing goods using local raw materials. They process, manufacture, and they want to sell some of them in the domestic market. And the law, the way it requires them to pay full CET, much as all the materials are locally sourced, apart from probably some packaging materials. Now, several companies closed down because they were targeting EAC market as their main market. So they produced using local raw materials, but they realized they could not sell. Yet, they enjoyed those incentives. So why did they close down? That's why I'm saying the incentives much as they make Kenya to be competitive and attractive, they don't actually offer a big margin in terms of comparability in the cost of doing business within the SEZs and non-SEZs. Now, to still carry that forward, a week ago we were discussing as economic zones, whether they are special economic zones, whether they are EPZs, whether they are just free economic zones, because all these names end up meaning the same. And we were discussing at Africa continental level, asking ourselves, goods manufactured under economic zones, how should they access the African market? Are they going to offer unfair competition to those which are operating outside the economic zones? So we did a lot of analysis, and research has been done, and we were coming up with a common agreement that, number one, these investors are located in Africa. These investors are creating jobs in Africa. These investors are building economies in Africa. And the proposal is they should access the African markets under preferential tariffs as long as they meet rules of origin criteria. Now, every country in the world is trying to attract investors. So they give some kind of package so that they entice investors to come to their countries. But eventually, when you analyze critically, you'll find you don't have a bigger competitive advantage over the others. And that is why, as far as I'm concerned, as long as goods are manufactured locally here, and they meet rules of origin, they actually end up having almost the same standing with goods produced outside the SEZs or outside any economic zone, depending on how a country may call it. To me, that is the position, and because I've been in this business for quite some time, and I have practically seen investors closing down and going to other countries simply because they are called the EPZs and they find they cannot sell much as they enjoy those incentives. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Steve Odua, let me just ask you as we head towards the election, is there a possibility that a conversation could be had with government around a stimulus package for manufacturers?
Yes, indeed. In fact, as it is already, the president has given a stimulus package, 13-point stimulus package that actually assists quite a number of manufacturers, of business people, as it were. I'll take an example of those in the tea industry, those in the coffee industry, and probably those already in the sugar industry. For the sugar industry, the 1 billion given as a stimulus package to help in mechanization would really, is a big opportunity for the manufacturers to be able to improve on their processing. And just around here, if you take an example of what Kibos is producing within their stand there, you can see the potential that you can have by enhancing your mechanization and use of technology, which that stimulus package is going to help in trying to address. If we look at other aspects like creating demand for products, by the Kazi Mtaani program, we are actually enhancing the purchasing power for some of the young Kenyans who are working through that program, and they will then be able to actually be a market for the manufacturers. So yes, that is already in place, but there's still room for further discussions and engagements to see how that can be even enhanced moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, things like reduction in the price of manufacturing, electricity.
Yes,
there's a lot of pain points here. There was a gentleman there who was talking about, and I think Kwame also alluded to it, it's really expensive to manufacture.
Yeah, indeed, some challenges the government has had due to some historical issues. For example, the cost of energy. Dr. Kimel just mentioned now about Naivasha being able to provide electricity at 5 US cents per kilowatt hour. This is because a lot of what makes the current cost of electricity high is the agreements that we had with the independent power producers, which was useful at that point in time. That was in the late 90s and the early 20s, where, for example, unlike Tanzania, where the dependency on hydro generation, when there was a drought, they had a lot of power blackouts. In Kenya, we bridged that gap by producing it through using thermal, oil. So, because of those long-term agreements, to ensure that the investment makes sense to the private sectors, then we made that commitment. But as part of now, what we are trying to review is because, again, we don't want to interfere with investments per se. We want to see how we can get into an agreement with the independent power producers to review the costings. And now that we have capacity to produce geothermal even more, we can then be able to bridge that gap, and hopefully we should be able to bring it down fast enough. But that has been, I agree, a pain point, especially for most manufacturers here.
Kwame, the issue of taxes and tax incentives for manufacturers.
Okay, you spoke about a stimulus. I don't know whether the government has fiscal space for a stimulus. I mean, by fiscal space, I mean whether it has enough money to actually be able to give a meaningful stimulus in terms of the size. But if that was to be considered, I think the design of it would have to matter. In my view, I would actually support the demand side. So I would not be giving a manufacturer money to manufacture stuff. I'd be telling them, if you manufacture this number of shoes, I'll buy them for this number of kids, right? Because design of incentives are actually also important. If you subsidize, and the government of Kenya can, I mean, that would be useful. The welfare effect would actually be massive. I saw a study that shows in some part of Western Kenya, they went to some schools. Of course, it's a reflection of the domestic conditions, where this paper says that 60% of the children didn't have shoes, and they're in a place that's giga-prone. So if government wanted to match a real need, as opposed to just pushing money to a favored manufacturing firm, it would say, fine, if you manufacture shoes that meet this quality, I just give shoes as an example, I don't have a specific name in mind, but if you manufacture shoes that meet this quality at this amount, and these kids can wear them for a whole year, then we'll pay you, because then you create jobs and everything, as opposed to simply giving somebody to manufacture the thing they've always wanted to manufacture, and it will be a politically driven thing. So the design matters as much as what you're trying to meet, so that actually as a public taxpayers, you can see that public money is being used in a way that's actually enhancing welfare. That would be useful for us to think. Secondly, I think because it's been mentioned here, it's very true. We've always wanted at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and this is not a rhetorical question. Why do you need to establish a special economic zone in Siaya County? Why can't you make the whole country a special economic zone? What that tells you is that there are such distortions that you need to go to specific places and tell people, if you work here, you're not going to pay for power and everything else. So for instance, I disagree with the Naivasha thing, with all due respect. The government of Kenya should tell us, if the only thing that's required for manufacturers to thrive is power at 5 kilowatts per hour, why does it have to be the Naivasha guy and not the Nairobi one? That's discrimination. They should say, our long-term plan is to bring that power to 5 cents per kilowatt hour, respective of where you are. Because the problem with place-based is if you're supporting places, you're going to crowd investment in places based on a single variable, and it's discriminatory to somebody else who say has a plant in Nairobi. So my view would be, make the whole country a special economic zone. Say, this is the incentive structure that we'd want for any business in Kenya. And then work towards making sure that every business can enjoy it, and not just the guy who's based in Naivasha. Because if I'm a mango factory, and I also need 5 kilowatt hours, and I'm only based in Makueni or Siaya County, and that is only being provided to somebody, it means either I have to transfer that stuff all the way to Naivasha to enjoy it, or it's discriminatory. I don't think that's useful. I mean, that's how most of them have been designed, but my view is make the entire country competitive in business by saying, regardless of where you are, we'll try and provide optimal conditions which meets at least these 6 commitments. Your power costs will be this, water will be available at this cost, or at least at this quality, this kind of security will be available, and all that. Something that takes a public goods effect, as opposed to only the people who can occupy Naivasha or Athi River, for instance. Thanks.
Very strong points there, Dr. Kimeu. what's your reflection on that?
My comment is, as a country, we have to start somewhere. Even those who do research, you do a pilot, you see how it works, and then eventually you can decide to roll it out to cover more locations. So what I would want to say is Naivasha is demand-driven. We've had cases where, and I mentioned, the EPZ farms have been importing raw materials worth about 28 billion every year. Because we cannot produce the fabric locally here. So the government said, why can't we start at Naivasha, try to attract the mills there so that they produce the fabric to supply the EPZs as well as the other investors who are going to come. Now, if Naivasha is successful and it has the impact which the government expects it to have, then considering now saying, now that we are successful in Naivasha, if we were to duplicate the same in many parts of the country, the impact would be maybe 100-fold. And that would form a basis for the decision to be made in terms of how power tariff issues would be addressed. Thank you.
Okay. I'll now open it up to the floor. If you have any questions for our panelists, you could raise your hand, and there's a mic that's going around. And you could just state your name and shoot your question. Do we have a question from the floor on the topic at hand? Yes, there's a lady here who would like to ask a question. Please bring her a mic. Please state your name and your question or comment.
Good afternoon. My name is Anne Gitonga. I'm a policy analyst at the Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis. Apologies, Dr. Rose Ngugi should have been there, but she's elsewhere. Mine is just to inquire to what extent can policy and interventions such as what has been discussed here support micro and small enterprises, largely because of what is statistically available, that it employs 90% of our labor force, but in terms of value addition, it's about 20%. So there's something that we can provoke, and I guess with this window, there might be some opportunities that we can leverage on, which then from a policy point of view, we can start plugging into and analyzing, especially given SEZ, amongst the zones that can be gazetted is SME. Of course, it's not MSC. So although now I've started understanding that SEZ can actually introduce some unfair or uncompetitive behavior. So also that is something can be packed later. But to what extent can infrastructural support meet the need of MSCs? Because the more we discuss, the more we realize, even from a trade perspective, informal sector has been contributing to trade. That I found out in the earlier presentation. So they're there, but then how are they plugging into the whole economy might be now how we can start engage. I know it's a continuous discussion, so just some of your thoughts on that would be interesting.
Kwame, maybe you could take that and then I could release you because I know you have to be somewhere. Yes.
Okay, thanks. I mean, the reason we have to be circumspect about policies such as SEZs and special economic zones and export processing zones is they tend to be larger farms comparatively. So it means that those incentives that are available for export or to improve quality of material and of the export product are only available to a small number of people. So it tells you that actually, while that might be a way to start, it's actually suboptimal, because what it means, if you're providing 5 cents per kilowatt hour to a farm that's based in Naivasha, and a farm that's based in Athi River or say a different county in Elgeyo Marakwet, for instance, is not saying that. What you're actually doing is you're using the small farms' money to subsidize the bigger farms. So there's something that is inequitable about the design of special economic zones. I think that we need to, we might say that it's an important strategy for transition, but we have to be there. And that's what tells you is that the reason you need special economic zones if exports and obviously manufacturing productivity is to be raised, it tells you that we have certain structural problems that we need to solve for all farms and not just for the bigger farms that will occupy the zones. Because it's true, as it's been mentioned to us, as Anna's mentioned to us, small farms, SMEs also want to get into the export game. They also want to be plugged into the value chains with the other bigger farms. They also want to create the jobs and obviously to add to the value that's created aggregately in the aggregate by all manufacturing firms. So the point is, as I conclude, a policy that only works in a specific zone is not a good policy for everybody else, because then it means it's actually just specific farms that will occupy the place. We need to think about what manufacturing policy will work for any manufacturing farm regardless of its size. And that's perhaps the public good that we should pursue. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Sorry,
yeah, thank you for that, Kwame. Do we have another question from the floor, or was there a point that you would want to respond to, Dr.
Yeah, quick comment on the issue of what is the linkage between big manufacturers and SMEs in these special economic zones. I want to mention that the SEZs being developed at the moment, they have a cluster for big players and cluster for SMEs. The cluster for SMEs aims at creating or developing facilities which are suitable to the SMEs, and even the rates which are charged to the SMEs are lower from those which are charged the big players. And what we are doing now is to have the big players getting supplies from the small players. In fact, the investors who are flowing in now, the first question they're asking is, can we have SMEs with the capacity to produce for us? Or can we have SMEs whom we can train so that they can produce the components we require for our manufacturing? So the whole scenario has changed. It's not like before, when a big player would come, set up, and they manufacture themselves everything. Now they want supplies from the SMEs. That is why we are developing the SEZs with cluster for SMEs, whom we will be connecting with the big players so that they produce for them. In the process, we will be building capacity for our SMEs so that eventually they graduate and become big players. Thank you.
How would an SME then become part of that cluster?
How they do that is, you see, the cluster is inside the SEZs. The SMEs who would want to be located there, they approach SEZ authority with the kind of speciality, the business they are in, so that we assess their suitability to operate as SEZs in terms of what they are doing currently, even outside the SEZ. What kind of technology, what kind of products are they producing? Such that when we feel, yes, we can link them properly with the big players, then we bring them on board. Others will come not just to supply the big players, but they want to develop their capacities, product adaptation, and they want to operate under the SEZ regime, where through the incentives they can have a bit of competitiveness, and so they come in, we license them, they produce. We also support them in terms of getting potential buyers for their products. We help them in marketing so that they can quickly become stable and they produce quality which can be exported in other markets.
Okay, thank you. Do we have another question from the floor before we wind up this session? Okay, I would like to ask Steve Odua to give you closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, just as we are looking at the topic about the trilemma, I just want to encourage, especially our manufacturers, that just like we have seen with the COVID-19. There is quite a number of opportunities that are there within certain challenges. And the big opportunities, for example, in the COVID-19 was that we have been able to see the innovations we can make as a country. We can be able to increase our local production, our local manufacturing capacity. We even saw a reduction of our import bill in terms of products that were imported into that country. And a bit of that was subsidized by our local production. So indeed, even with the electioneering coming in, there are opportunities that are there or are likely to be there. And as we move beyond that period, let us embrace innovations. Let us embrace the economies of scale to be able to be global competitive. And let us use the opening markets, especially both locally through the Buy Kenya, Build Kenya, and also export markets through the various regional agreements like the AFCFTA. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Kimau, your closing remarks?
What I would want us to ask ourselves one basic question. Why are we exporting raw materials for use by other countries? Why do we export them? The government policy is to value add, is to agro-process. We have companies which are doing that. But they have no capacity to utilize our local resources and raw materials. Now, that means what? We need to build our capacity in terms of attracting additional investments into this country so that we utilize as much raw materials and resources available in this country. We add value to them. We create jobs there. We export more and we grow our economy. That is how the SEZ program will be able to come in and attract additional investors in different sectors to take advantage of our raw materials and ensure that our farmers get ready markets locally here. And in the process, we build our economy. So I don't see SEZs as posing undue competition to the local manufacturers because we have them. They have reached their optimal capacities, but we still are exporting raw materials, whether they are minerals, whether they are agricultural, whatever they are, we are exporting them. And now it means we have big opportunity to bring in investors and to attract them. They say, how competitive is Kenya? Through the SEZ program or the EPZ program, we make Kenya competitive and we'll be able to attract those investors, and in the process, we create capacities and markets for our local resources. We add value, we create the jobs, we earn the foreign currency, and our economy grows. That is where I would look at the SEZ scheme. It is here to make sure the gaps which have been there in terms of the capacity are bridged up by bringing on board additional new investments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, that's been the panel discussion on the trilemma challenge of COVID-19, the upcoming general elections, and of course the widening fiscal deficit in the country. I want to say thank you so much to my panelists here, Dr. Mesha Kimeu, CEO, Special Economic Zone Authority, Kwame Owino, Institute of Economic Affairs, CEO, and Steve Odua, Director, Private Sector and Business Environment Development. Please give the panelists a round of applause as they leave the stage. We'll take a short 3-minute break with some music. As we prepare bit of a background of the advisory unit and also of the initiatives that are there right now by the government to spur growth in Kenya and drive an export-led economy. I think, is there, yeah, maybe you could share the microphone with her, yeah. Is her mic on, please?
Yes, I think now it's on.
Excellent.
Yes. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. The SME Advisory Unit is a department that is housed within the Executive Office of the President. We play a coordination, more of a coordination role, working with the mandated government agencies to ensure that development projects or the policy regulations are carried out in a collaborative manner. As we know, there's right now a lot of spotlight on the SME sector, but also we can be frank to say that everyone is operating in silos. There is a silo mentality. So whereby you feel that you're making progress, you later on realize that there is duplication of efforts. So you're actually running the race, but you're not getting to the finish line with whatever it is that you're trying to help the SMEs with. So what we try to do is play that coordination role, ensure that people are more aligned and are actually, you know, coexisting and working in unity towards achieving their objectives. Regarding your question on how it is that we can better prepare SMEs to make sure that they're export ready, first, we need to appreciate that fact that even in manufacturing, as we manufacture, we have cottage industries, but we have the big players, the ones who are considered the big players. But the big players also rely on SMEs to get their goods out there. Because you know, out of 10 products that you're producing, 7 are actually, average of 7 are sold through the SMEs, either through the dukas or, you know, through the informal channels. So it is good to appreciate the unique role that they play. So in terms of SMEs, how do we get them export ready? Of course, there are these things that we've discussed over and over, which are the cross-cutting issues. But how about now, you know, we elevate to the next level and actually break down these 2 pillars? Because if we can have this in pillars with a clear understanding that, one, the regulatory framework, which is the policy, is important. How do we look at that? How do we ensure that the environment is friendly or works for the SMEs? As we know, we've come up with policies that are pro-SME. We recently had the launch of the MSC policy, but what have we had out of this policy? How has it impacted the MSCs? Yet it was a presidential directive. And, you know, different agencies plugged in, gave in their views, but what do we see in how it's translating? Because it's a policy that's already at play. So even as we create these policies, we need to have the SMEs at the, you know, at the forefront. Let's create policies that would work for the SMEs and that would be ready to run with them and start executing them. So policy and regulation is pillar number 1. Pillar number 2 is access to finance. You cannot talk to an SME and the first thing that leaves their mouth is not access to finance. How are we making sure that they have the right financing available for them? You know, we have the banks who have the partial credit guarantee scheme, which is, you know, covers the SMEs to be able to get loans. But these SMEs still hit a hurdle because, you know, they don't have their books in order and, you know, they're not still credit worthy according to the banks because they'll not have the documentation. But have we looked at the fact that digital lenders are already in that space? That the SMEs are relying on digital banking for most of their transactions, most of their savings, how they purchase their goods. So that is an avenue that we need to be realistic with. How do we work with the digital lenders to ensure that SMEs get the right financing? If it's a credit guarantee scheme towards that, how do we support the digital lenders in that space? Thirdly, as we prepare them for them to be export ready, we need to look at training. How do we build their capacity? Yeah? How do we encourage them to also share the infrastructure, machinery, and the rest? Because not all SMEs will be able to, mechanize and to import or to, scale up in terms of mechanization. But we can have shared resources. We can encourage a shared economy. We can also train these SMEs on how it is that they can access such opportunities. So that is very, very important. And market access, that is pillar number 4. We talk of how to get them to export. Are they aware of the opportunities that are out there? Or is this information only being trickled to those who can actually access these opportunities? So it would be good if we can enrich them also with these opportunities, and then also understand that SMEs are scared because of the incidences that they've been having when they approach some of the government offices. Yeah? Yes, my colleague is seated next to me and he'll have his opportunity. But, they're scared. So how do we encourage them? How do we show them that, KRA, my brother Kebs here, and the other relatives are not against them but are for them? How do we encourage them to know that through national level reforms, these same agencies have committed to support SMEs? KPLC has committed, KRA has committed, KEBS has committed. There are different commitments that each agency has come up with. And some even have desks, SME desks, that SMEs are not aware exist within these organizations. So even as we get them export ready, how do we make sure they have this information? What kind of documentation, certification, how do you walk that journey? So I think for us to be export ready in terms of the SMEs, we need to have a collaborative effort at the government level to make sure that those 4 pillars are looked into. And then I think we'll make progress there.
Okay, so I can see Anne there smiling, and she's a CEO and founder of Waithera Beauty. Now, when you think about what you've just had said in terms of regulatory frameworks, in terms of access to affordable credit, in terms of capacity building, in terms of access to markets, tell us a bit about your journey in the founding of Waithera Beauty and whether any of these resources were available to you when you started.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Anna Njoroge Ngaroya. I am the founder and CEO of Waithera Beauty and Mosara Kenya Limited. What that translates to, I often question my sanity. I am always tired and always broke. We are a small manufacturer of beauty products. We actually formulate and manufacture locally. And I'm going to tell you a small story about how I got here. I graduated high school at 16 years old, and I went to secretarial school in Nairobi. I grew up in a small village in Nakuru County called Cherumen. It's one of those places you only hear during elections. It's a polling station. And at 19, I got a job in Nairobi with a reputable company as a secretary to the marketing manager of a reputable company that had a Mzungu MD. And at 20 years old, I got fired from my first job. Why? I would have fired me too. I was sitting in a department head meeting, which had about 9 men, including my MD, me, and another woman who was also the secretary to the MD. We had one simple role: take notes. And I used to have a really good memory. Now I'm old. I'm middle-aged. I'm in my mid-40s. So I would doodle. Instead of taking shorthand, I had a very good memory. I could remember everything. And I look up, and everyone is looking at me. I didn't have my face trained to kind of not display my thoughts. I've gotten much better, still not perfect, working on it. And the Mzungu boss, MD, asked me what? And I said, what you just said was dumb. I said I would have fired me too. And I got fired. But that ignited something different and changed my trajectory. I decided, it was the first time I consciously actually thought about it. I make a horrible secretary. I was actually really horrible. I was good at my job, but I'm opinionated. I don't shut up. I ask too many questions, and I'm not very good at taking directions that don't have an explanation. So decided to go to school, went to the US, did a bachelor's in accounting, got an MBA, and actually had a really, really good career in the US in the finance world with Fortune 500 companies. And at some point, I started getting dissatisfied, and I decided I wanted to make a difference, I wanted to do more, and I wanted to do that at home. It was time we started telling our own stories in our own words, and I wanted to be part of that narrative. So in 2014, I packed my bags. I actually put all my stuff in storage. I leased my house. I had a house. And I packed 2 bags, well, 3, with a bag of shoes. A girl needs shoes. And I moved back. I had no idea what I was going to do. All I knew is I wanted to be more. And I moved back, and manufacturing was never part of the story. If somebody had told me at that point that I would become a manufacturer, I would have actually laughed them out of town. But when I came back, I had this passion. I wanted to support local. I wanted to buy local. I am a tomboy who loves everything fashion and beauty. I love beauty products. I love skincare. I love hair products. Right now, you can't tell. Yeah, my hair changes quite a bit. And I went on this journey. When I went into any beauty shop or supermarket, there were so many few made in Kenya products. They were almost non-existent. And unfortunately, that's still the case. Last year, Cam gave me a coach, and he wanted to see my distribution channel network, and we went to one of the largest beauty shops in Nairobi, and there are literally less than 10 made in Kenya products. Less than 10. And there are probably more if you factor in the multinationals, but smaller brands, there are very few. So because I couldn't find anything, and I love nice things, I have never disputed that, I started buying when I traveled. So I'll travel, I'll buy things. When my friends were coming, I would buy things then. But I seriously started thinking about why can't we create our own? What is so hard that we can't have made in Kenya products? And I remember one time being very upset, being in, I think it was Saski's, and there was coconut oil for skin that was made in Hungary. They don't even have coconut trees. How do they have coconut oil that they manufacture, that they're bringing back to our supermarkets for us to buy? And there Waithera Beauty was born. And Waithera is actually, my grandmother. It's inspired by the power of the African woman. We embrace the potential of a woman's life in all its beautiful complexities. And the goal was manufacture, actually not just manufacture, create products that are international quality standards, affordable, and work for our skin, because no one else is looking out for us. And started the research. And if there's any person looking to go into manufacturing here, research is one of the biggest things. So went into research, listened, approached everyone. I have no shame. So Kebs, I will walk in, and I walk into the corner office like confidently, like I know what I'm doing, and I'll ask the questions. I'll walk into Kerry, and I'll ask the questions. But I also realize as I speak to a lot of founders in manufacturing, especially SMEs, I know that is one of the biggest challenges. So eventually, in 2017, we went to market, and we first started with fragrance. We control the supply chain, meaning of our ingredients, because we want to make sure the quality of our ingredients is that high. Because I can't start telling Kenyans to buy local and not buy imported if I cannot create something of equal value or higher. But the challenges were many, from where to source raw materials, how to get regulation going. It's still a challenge to this day. Where to get packaging. I remember going into industry area and going to all the plastics manufacturers looking for a bottle, and I had this vision in my mind of what it should be like, and I couldn't find what I wanted. But then you had other big businesses, Scanem being one of them, that came in and stepped in and really helped me out. So leveraging networks. I remember walking into Kebs and for 3 weeks couldn't get any help. But eventually, when help started moving, it took a week for me to get my mark. But there are all these challenges in SME, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful journey. We have employees now. We started with 2 retailers when we first went to market. I was terrified. So finally, we've gone through all the hopes. We have product, but where do we sell it? And I started approaching all these retailers, beauty shops, supermarkets, pharmacies that sell beauty products. And it was rejection after rejection after rejection. But I am relentless. And I walked into Eva Pharmacy one day at the hub and gave my same spiel, spoke to the director, didn't know he was one of the directors at the time. And he said, bring your products. And I remember looking at him going, really? And he said, yes. So Eva Pharmacy became our first outlet. So now we could actually start talking about what we had. And that's what I mean by support of other small businesses, because Eva Pharmacy is a small business. And from there, from 2017, July of 2017, starting in 1 outlet and then 2, we are in 50 outlets at the moment. We are in Burundi, we are in Uganda, we are in Tanzania. We were actually just about to enter the US market last year, but because of COVID, things slowed down. And we were up to 11 employees before COVID. We had to let them all go at some point because that was huge, especially April, May, when the country was shut down. Beauty sees a direct impact from the lockdown because if people are not going out, no one is buying beauty products. It's literally immediate. You can see it in sales. And we have now back up to 6 full-time employees, 2 part-time employees, a multitude of casuals when we are in a production circle. We have multitude of consultants from lawyers, formulators, production experts. So, and even growing other small businesses. Like right now, the guy we use for our deliveries, the writer, has started up employing more people because of the many deliveries we have.
So there's a chain, a chain reaction.
Actually a chain reaction to it. And that was a decision. That's why we made the decision to manufacture in Kenya. It would actually be easier for me to manufacture in China and import product into Kenya. But that, creating wealth, because I truly believe we are to develop. I remember like I said, I'm in my mid-40s. All I've heard since I was a little kid is we are developing. When are we going to ever develop? So to really, really develop, we need to create industry. And
absolutely.
I'm very passionate about that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, so
let me bring in, let me, sorry to cut short, let me bring in Dr. Narikai now, because from the Kenya industrial estates, where you work around incubating, financing, and developing SMEs countrywide. When you hear the story of Waithera Beauty, this must be something that, you know, is right up your alley as KIE. Why do you think we have a situation where there are many Waitheras out there who are still struggling with the things that Anne is talking about?
Thank you very much. First of all, let me congratulate Waithera.
Actually, let's give a round of applause.
Yeah.
Manufacturing works.
Yes. And also to acknowledge what my colleague said, because while they sit at the presidency, now we are having a one government approach, multi-agency approach. So we are bringing all our synergies increasingly and our expertise to bear to support SMEs. So I really want to acknowledge that we're one of the beneficiaries of their coordinating role, and it is bearing fruit. Thank you very much. Back to the issue of Waithera, I can completely identify with her. If you listen to her very carefully, I mean, you see grit, you see persistence. First of all, as the business grew, she refused to die. The business just refused to die. I can hear that, isn't it? Because you can be talented, you can have all these resources. But if you don't have that grit, stickability, the ability never to give up, you cannot hack it as an entrepreneur. And that, to me, is a common denominator of any successful entrepreneur, because there'll be challenges. Back to the question about what we do and how it fits in. That's why this forum is important, and the role the president is playing in coordinating all of us. Because Waithera might not be aware there are solutions Yes, she was able to get a coach from CAM, but she might not be able to know the role KI plays, for instance, and the rest. So we have a lot to do in terms of sensitizing. What we do at Kenya Industries is, just as an example, we have 3 roles which fit right down your alley. We do incubation, we do support SMEs through affordable and cheap financing. We also do entrepreneurial capacity building. And we also have a role of linking SMEs to markets, to technologies, to suppliers, vertical, horizontal, so forth. And when you talk about incubation, we are in 37 counties of this country, and in 35 of those we have incubation centers. And the facilities are open to SMEs who would want to manufacture and add value, because to demystify manufacturing is simply, as Noreen said, value addition. It's value addition. It doesn't need to be complicated. So we provide common space, or rather they're able to get access to utilities, to all those facilities, and the size that you do require, and we incubate them for 5 years, 3 months. Another cohort would come. You would want to add value to your to manufacture cosmetics, add value or manufacture nails, add value to agro products. So that's what we do. When you're in that incubator, we first of all diagnose to see at what stage are you in. And more often than not, as she mentioned, or she alluded to it, knowledge and research is absolutely critical. Research and research and research, because then you shorten that period. And in fact, what has happened out there is that in models that have been developed, some businesses take as much as 70–80% of their time to plan and to research, so that implementation can become seamless. The other big challenge is capacity building in terms of the soft skills, like keeping books, linking to markets, managing personnel. Rudimentary as it may sound, it's critical, because you can start a business unless you appreciate those skills, you cannot accelerate or you cannot scale up to the next level. So we do provide, once you're in that incubator, we give those business development, business advisory services, help you to development business plans, link you to markets and so forth. But we also can give you financing. Financing, which is working capital all the way to long-term capital. Working capital.
Dr. You should say affordable financing.
Yes. Okay. Affordable and accessible financing. But our financing is 10% on our reducing balance, meaning the effective rate would be about 7 to 6.5%. Working capital is typically 1 year for commercial banks, but we stretch it to 48 months to accommodate SMEs. If you buy a machine, or we buy it for you on a loan, we can extend the period up to 8 years and give you a grace period of 3 months to 12 months to help you to set up. Now, those are some of the things that are not out there. Yes, collateral is important for us to get collateral, because these are public funds and we need to create a revolving pool for others to borrow. But that is not the predominant factor. It is that the business has to be viable, because if it is viable, security will just be that, it will just be security. But we've also found a way of accommodating some of our clients who don't have collateral. We developed a product for women groups. They don't need to have collateral because they can cross-guarantee each other. And their repayment, really 99.9%. Also youth groups. We're also moving forward, working to develop other products like LPO financing and the rest. So that is what we do, and we might not have done enough to get that information out there, but it is very important to realize that unless we address these factors affecting SMEs, then there'll be no significant difference made to this economy. Because according to Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, upwards of 90%, maybe 95% of all businesses are micro, small, and medium enterprises. And they account for about 80% of employment. They might not always be the highly skilled employment, it's employment. And they contribute 34% of GDP. So if you really work at it, that is the easiest way to generate wealth for the country, as you mentioned. And that is now what we do pursue ourselves. And you'll be glad to note that through our incubation program, some of our clients have grown from micro, because that's our business, to grow from micro, to accelerate it to small, then to medium. Once they become corporates, they can be able to go out there. And we lend anything from 100,000 shillings to 20 million. Once now you're able to absorb that, surely now you have the capacity to go to commercial banks. And some of our customers before, like Hako Industries, they were incubated in our sheds in the industrial area. Mastermind Tobacco, that's become a multinational, incubated in our sheds in Nakuru. Spectre International, and many more. So that is really what we do. And we really call upon SMEs to patronize our institutions, as was mentioned, because we work as an ecosystem through the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Enterprise Development. If you come to KIA with an idea, KIRDI is there to help you and will hold your hand for them to perfect your research. Keep it and protect your intellectual property. It's easy for us to refer to you there. And they nowadays charge zero for SMEs for that service, and KEBS as well.
Excellent.
Then you can now come to us to finance.
Because KEBS, thank you so much, Dr. That's really, really great information. I don't know how many of us here knew even half of that, but because if I mean, where I stay during the COVID period, one of the things that happened is that people very quickly formed a market group in the estate, and people started doing peanut butter, others started, very small cottage industry stuff, someone is making cakes. And then when you start having the conversation about, wow, your cakes are so good, your peanut butter is amazing, why don't you take it to the supermarkets? I have to go through KEBS. So, Mr. Gajanja is here to demystify to us what that process looks like and why it is that so many SMEs sort of run into roadblocks when it comes to KEBS as the regulating authority for manufactured products. So, karibu.
Good afternoon, everyone. Correct. My name is Joseph Gashanja. I work for KEBS. There I sit as the manager in charge of product certifications. So I think I'm in the right place.